I never thought a trash can could ruin my peace, let alone spark a neighborhood war. But on a quiet Tuesday morning in April, I opened my email over coffee and nearly spat out my first sip. Subject HOA violation. Improper trash container placement. From compliance at willowridgeahoa.org. The message was short, sterile, and full of arrogance. Apparently, my black plastic trash bin standard issue from the city had violated Willow Ridge HOA Regulation 8.3.5b. Refused containers shall be placed no more than 24 inches from the side structure of the home and shall be fully obscured from street view when not in active municipal pickup hours. Here's the thing. I had moved the can to the edge of the garage after pickup just like I had for the past 5 years. It wasn't blocking the sidewalk. It wasn't visible from the street unless someone was using binoculars or crawling through my rose bushes. I even double-checked. It was less than 3 feet from the side of my house and completely shielded by a magnolia tree. But apparently that wasn't good enough anymore. I replied politely asking for clarification and received a response within 2 hours. Dear Mr. Holloway, this violation stands. Further noncompliance will result in additional notices and possible fines in accordance with our graduated enforcement schedule. I remember staring at that line, graduated enforcement schedule. It sounded like something from a dystopian rulebook. I figured it was a misunderstanding, maybe a new inspector, or someone got a little clipboard happy. I was wrong. By Friday, I received 3 more emails, each with new violations. Violation 8.3.5d. Lid not securely closed even though the can was empty. Violation 8.35e. Container emits odor detectable from sidewalk. Violation 8.35f. Container visible on security footage taken from HOA vehicle. That last one creeped me out. They were recording us. I walked outside that evening, made my way to the curb, and looked at my trash can, a silent black rectangle sitting obediently against the stucco wall. It hadn't changed, but clearly, something else had. The next week, things escalated faster than I could keep up. 7 more violations, then 9, then 17. Each came with a specific timestamp, a photo attached, and an itemized fine ranging from $50 to $250. They cited things like proximity to lavender bushes, lid hinge, potential hazard, and even casting shadow on HOA easement. It was absurd. It was harassment. And worse, it was clearly targeted. None of my neighbors, not even the ones whose trash cans actually sat at the curb for days, had received a single violation. So why me? I started to think back. 3 months ago, I had attended an HOA meeting and voiced concerns about the recent increase in fees. I questioned the budget, specifically why $18,000 had been spent on decorative landscaping stones that never appeared. I asked if a third-party audit could be done. The president, Ms. Karen Whitlock, had narrowed her eyes at me, smiled with a tightness that could cut glass, and said, "We all have roles to play, Mr. Holloway. Yours is to follow the rules." Apparently, that smile had been a warning. Now the rules were her weapon. I tried to keep my cool. I logged each violation, kept a spreadsheet with dates times photos. I even installed my own cameras, not for security, but to defend myself. Then on day 12, I came home to find a bright yellow sticker pasted on my garage door. Final notice: failure to remediate code violations will result in property encumbrance. Beneath it was a typed summary: 37 active violations totaling $8,350 in cumulative fines. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. 1 trash can. 1. I had lived in Willow Ridge for nearly 9 years. Paid my dues, mowed my lawn, voted in every HOA election even when no one else showed up. I helped neighbors hang holiday lights and repaired a storm-bent fence for a widow down the street without asking for a dime. And now they wanted to slap a lien on my home for a trash can. That night, I sat in my home office with every light on, 3 cups of coffee beside me, and a folder labeled "The War on Waste." Because if they were going to make this personal, I was going to make it count. I knew I couldn't fight fire with fire, but I could fight it with documentation, with logic, with exposure. I took screenshots of every violation notice, matched them against camera footage, showing the can had not moved, highlighted discrepancies in timestamps, gathered statements from neighbors willing to say their cans were untouched, even when left out for days. Then I printed it all, 3 inches thick, and placed it in a manila envelope labeled "Evidence of Targeted Enforcement Holloway. Vir. Willow Ridge. HOA. I slid the envelope into my briefcase and circled tomorrow's date on the calendar. It was time to visit someone who knew what the HOA didn't think I'd ever consult. I arrived at the county government annex building right when the doors opened. The reception area was quiet, just the smell of burnt coffee and linoleum polish lingering in the air. I asked to see someone from Property Standards Enforcement and was directed to a glass-walled office on the second floor. The woman behind the desk wore glasses and a look of polite exhaustion. Her name tag read L. Gonzalez, Public Affairs Liaison. I introduced myself and handed her the envelope. "I'm not here to file a formal complaint yet," I said, "but I need a professional opinion." She raised an eyebrow and opened the folder, flipping through the first few pages. Her eyes widened as she saw the sequence of violation notices, the timestamps, the photographs, the spreadsheet. 37 for a trash can, she muttered. In less than 2 weeks. And the can didn't move an inch, I said, tapping one of the security stills. "See this timestamp? Now look at this next one taken 4 days later. Same exact shadow on the driveway." She let out a low whistle. "This reeks of targeted enforcement, possibly harassment." I exhaled for the first time that day. "But the real kicker," I said, leaning in. "These regulations, they're not in the county's registered HOA bylaws. The trash rules don't exist in the version on file." She pulled up the records on her computer. We scrolled side by side through the HOA's last recorded declaration of covenants and restrictions, last amended 4 years ago. No mention of 8.3.5b. No sub clauses on odor, shadow, or visibility from HOA surveillance assets. I smiled grimly. "So they made up the rules." "Looks like it," she said, already beginning to copy the file. That same afternoon, I contacted a local HOA attorney, someone not on retainer with any neighborhood association. His name was Daniel Cross, an ex-prosecutor turned private counsel, with a reputation for taking on overreaching HOAs. He agreed to meet the next day. When I laid out the violations and the discrepancy in recorded bylaws, he leaned back, fingers steepled. "This is worse than I thought," he said. "They've essentially created their own shadow code, enforcing penalties without legal foundation." He explained how HOA powers are derived strictly from recorded covenants filed with the county and agreed to by residents upon purchase. Any new rule to be binding must be properly amended, filed, and publicly disclosed. They can't enforce phantom regulations, he added. This could constitute fraud, abuse of power, possibly even grounds for civil liability. I nodded. "Then I want to push back, not just for me, but because this could happen to anyone here." He looked impressed. "Then let's do it the right way." We began drafting a formal cease and desist letter demanding immediate withdrawal of all violations, a freeze on fines, and a review of HOA regulatory legitimacy. He would file it with the HOA board, copy the county, and prepare a preliminary case should it need to go to court. HOAs usually fold once you show you know the game better than they do, he said. But if this Karen is as power drunk as she sounds, she might double down first. He was right. 2 days after the letter was delivered, I came home to find a notice of escalated enforcement action tacked to my front door. Now they were threatening architectural review of my property, claiming that my garage door was non-conforming and that my exterior paint appeared faded. I laughed. My garage door had been installed 2 years ago. My house had been professionally painted last spring. These claims were pure retaliation, but this time they'd gone too far. They weren't just misusing power, they were leaving fingerprints. I returned to Attorney Cross with the new documents. His jaw clenched as he read. "They've just handed us motive. You challenged their authority, and now they're weaponizing reviews to intimidate you. This is textbook." He filed a second letter this time, requesting an immediate injunction against HOA enforcement actions targeting my address. Simultaneously, we contacted the State Attorney General's Consumer Protection Bureau. Harassment by homeowners associations was becoming an increasingly common complaint, and they had a hotline specifically for this purpose. "They think you're an easy mark," Daniel told me, "but you're about to become their worst PR nightmare." The real turning point came on a Saturday morning. I was walking my dog when I noticed a familiar face across the street, Mr. Kendrick, an elderly veteran and one of the quietest residents on our block. He waved me over. "I heard you're in trouble with the board," he said. "Wanted to tell you something." He led me around the side of his house, pointed to his Ring camera, and played a clip. It showed a woman, unmistakably Karen, walking down his sidewalk at 6:23 a.m., holding a clipboard and what looked like a phone. She paused near my driveway, turned, and took a series of zoomed-in photos. Then she turned to Kendrick's property, squinted, and muttered, "This trash is contagious." I blinked. "Did she say that about my house?" He nodded. "She's been snooping around all week. I filed a trespassing complaint yesterday." That was it. I posted the clip on a private neighborhood forum, no commentary, just the footage. Within hours, neighbors started messaging me. Turns out I wasn't the only one targeted. A single mom on Juniper Lane had been fined for sidewalk chalk. A retired schoolteacher on Pecan Drive received notices about overgrown potted plants. A veteran with PTSD had been harassed about a support animal's waste bag visible from the street. A wave of anger began to ripple. People were fed up, and Karen had no idea the tide was turning. By Monday morning, the clip of Karen skulking along our sidewalks had gone viral, not just in our little community forum, but across local Facebook groups, next-door threads, and even the town's subreddit. Someone had added subtitles. Someone else added a laugh track. The phrase, "This trash is contagious," became the unofficial rallying cry of every resident who'd ever felt harassed by the HOA. It didn't take long before neighbors started sharing their own stories publicly. A woman on Willow Creek posted side-by-side photos, one of lavender bushes blooming just over the edge of the sidewalk, and the other a violation notice from the HOA citing uncontrolled flora intrusion. A family on Maple Ridge revealed that they'd been fined $75 because their backyard trampoline could be seen from the street. Someone else uploaded screenshots showing the same HOA violation template being reused with different names and addresses, same font, same language, just swapped details. It was clear now that the board had been working from a playbook. The dam had burst. I got a knock on my door that evening. It was Mrs. Alvarez, a no-nonsense retired nurse from 2 blocks over. She handed me a manila folder. "I was on the board 10 years ago," she said, "before Karen. Inside were meeting minutes, HOA declarations, the original founding documents of our subdivision. None of this matches what she's enforcing now," she said. "This community wasn't meant to be a gated kingdom." We sat at my kitchen table, spreading out documents, highlighting passages, comparing dates. Karen had not only added unauthorized rules, she had altered enforcement protocols without board votes. Her version of the bylaws had never been filed with the county. Worse still, the Architectural Review Committee didn't legally exist anymore. It had been dissolved 5 years ago in a budget vote and never reinstated. "She just made it all up," Mrs. Alvarez said, shaking her head, and we all let her. "Not anymore." We called a community meeting for that Thursday. Not a board-sanctioned one, but a grassroots gathering hosted at the local library auditorium. Over 80 people showed up. There was no yelling, no chaos, just stories. One by one, neighbors stood and spoke. A young father fined for leaving a stroller on the porch. An elderly man told his flag display was visually disruptive. A nurse cited for hanging scrubs out to dry after a 12-hour shift. I stood last. I explained how I had been issued 37 violations for 1 trash can, how I had found no record of those rules in the official county filings, how I had hired a lawyer, and how we had evidence of fabricated enforcement, illegal surveillance, and coordinated harassment. I didn't ask them to fight. I just asked them to see. To see the power we had allowed someone like Karen to wield unchecked. To remember that an HOA is meant to serve the community, not control it. The applause lasted almost a full minute. That night, a petition began circulating to call a special election. According to our original covenants, if 51% of homeowners signed in agreement, the board could be dissolved and new nominations opened. Within 48 hours, we had 63%. Karen panicked. She sent out an email blast claiming that outside agitators were attempting to destroy the neighborhood's integrity. She accused me by name of inciting rebellion against necessary order. She threatened fines, lawsuits, called my lawyer a hired thug. And then she made her biggest mistake. She called a special security meeting at the HOA clubhouse and invited a private enforcement firm to present their enhanced neighborhood patrol plan. Their uniforms looked eerily similar to law enforcement gear. Their vehicles had lights. Their insignias were vaguely official. One even carried a baton. Residents walked out. One neighbor recorded the whole thing. Within hours, the footage was sent to the local news station under the subject line, HOA or private police. The story aired 2 days later. My phone exploded. Calls, messages. reporters asking for interviews. Even the mayor's office issued a statement expressing concern over quasi-policing within civilian neighborhoods. The backlash hit hard. Karen's carefully curated facade as protector of property values crumbled overnight. The board panicked. 2 members resigned. One went on record, anonymously, admitting that Karen had been making decisions unilaterally for over a year. The final blow. Attorney Cross filed an official complaint with the state's Department of Housing and Community Development, attaching the 37 fake violations, the surveillance photos, the made-up rules, and the recording of Karen's patrol presentation. An investigation was opened. Karen tried to rally support. She printed flyers, organized a neighborhood pride walk, even offered a free landscaping consultation to any homeowner who reaffirmed support for her leadership. Only 3 people showed up. That Sunday, a knock came at my door. It was Karen. No clipboard, no sunglasses, no smugness, just a forced smile and a trembling voice. "We should talk," she said. I didn't let her in. Instead, I handed her an envelope with my lawyer's letterhead. "It's not personal," I said. "It's lawful." She stared at me for a moment, then turned and walked down my steps. For the first time in a long while, she didn't look like someone in charge. She looked like someone who finally understood that control built on fear doesn't last forever. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when I saw the sleek black car pull into my driveway. Not a police cruiser, not Karen, no HOA clipboard in sight. Instead, a man in a tailored navy suit stepped out, briefcase in hand, sunglasses perched on the bridge of his nose, like he'd walked off the set of a courtroom drama. He approached with the confidence of someone used to dictating terms, not requesting them. "Mr. Jenkins," he asked. "That's me," I said, stepping onto the porch, keeping my voice even. "I'm Thomas R. Halberd, legal counsel representing Oak Hill Community Preservation Association." That was the HOA's full legal name, a mouthful used mostly in fine print and on legal warnings. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a letter sealed in a crisp envelope embossed with gold. He offered it like a peace offering. "I'd like to resolve this matter before it escalates further," he said. I took the envelope but didn't open it yet. Instead, I motioned toward the bench on the porch. "Have a seat." He hesitated, probably surprised I hadn't invited him inside. I didn't plan to. Instead, I reached behind me and flicked on the small security camera I'd mounted above the door. Its soft red light blinked to life, a subtle but clear signal this conversation was being documented. I wanted him to know I'd learned something from Karen. We sat. The air was heavy with silence. "I understand you've received an unusual number of violation notices," he began. 37, I replied, all within 11 days, for one trash can. He cleared his throat. "While the board acknowledges that some actions may have been overzealous, the purpose of the HOA is to maintain standards, order. Order doesn't come from intimidation," I said. "It comes from trust, and no one here trusts you anymore." He tried to maintain composure. "I'd like to propose a withdrawal of all outstanding violations, a return of any paid fines, and a non-disclosure agreement to prevent further publicity." I laughed. It was quiet, but I let it hang in the air. "You think this is about money?" He blinked, adjusting his tie. "Isn't it always?" I stood and walked inside, returning moments later with a binder. I handed it to him. Inside were time-stamped photos, violation letters, surveillance screenshots, a map of the neighborhood zoning ordinances, and most importantly, a notarized affidavit from Mrs. Alvarez, the former board member. "I'm not suing for cash," I said. "I'm suing to expose what's broken." He flipped through the binder. The deeper he got, the more his polished confidence began to crack. His jaw tensed. His lips pressed into a thin line. "Does Karen know you've collected this?" he asked. "She will," I said. "So will the news, so will the state housing board, so will the town council." He looked up, the realization settling in. "You're serious." As serious as a trash can being turned into a weapon. He closed the binder slowly, carefully. "Mr. Jenkins," he said, standing, "if this goes public, it will damage the reputation of the entire board. People might lose their homes." "No," I said. "People have already lost their peace of mind. Some have lost their savings, their dignity, their sense of belonging." He paused, nodding once, not in agreement but acknowledgement. "I'll take this back to my client," he said. As he stepped off my porch, he turned one last time. "You've made your point," he said, loud and clear. I watched his car roll down the street, the sunlight glinting off his windshield, until it disappeared around the corner. I didn't feel victorious, not yet, but I felt like the scales had begun to tip. Later that evening, my lawyer called. He'd received a follow-up letter from Halberd's office, a formal proposal to dismiss all charges and issue an apology in writing with no gag order. I said no, because this wasn't just about me anymore. The next step wasn't a quiet resolution. It was a firestorm, and I was ready to light the match. The following morning, I skipped my usual coffee run and headed straight for the county courthouse. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even my neighbor Greg, who had become my sounding board throughout this whole HOA nightmare. I needed answers, and I needed them from the source. The county clerk's office was tucked into a red brick building on the east side of town, smelling faintly of musty paper and government-grade printer toner. A fan oscillated lazily above the front counter as I approached a woman wearing a name tag that read Marcy. "Can I help you?" she asked, peering over her bifocals. "I'm looking for the registered municipal regulations for Oak Hill Community Preservation Association," I said. "I need to know if they've filed any updates in the last 12 months specifically regarding sanitation ordinances or property compliance rules." Marcy's eyebrows shot up slightly. "That's specific." "I have 37 reasons for being specific," I said, sliding one of my violation letters across the counter. She took it, read the header, and let out a soft whistle. "Karen's HOA, huh? You know her." "Sweetheart, everyone who's worked in this office more than a year knows Karen." Marcy turned to her terminal and began typing. I watched the reflection of the screen in her glasses. Line after line of legal filings scanned PDFs timestamps. After a few moments, she frowned. "There's been no update to their sanitation guidelines since 2012, she said. And even that one was minor, just a clarification on bin sizes. Nothing about placement timing or fines. "What about enforcement mechanisms?" "Nope. Only the city's sanitation department can issue citations. HOAs can request reviews, but they don't have enforcement authority. Not unless they file for special municipal designation, which Oak Hill hasn't done." She printed 2 documents and handed them to me. "Here," she said. "These are the current registered regulations and the applicable city sanitation laws. If they're fining you based on anything else, it's not legal." My pulse quickened, not from anger this time, but from confirmation. They had nothing. Not only had Karen's HOA created their own fake policies, they were enforcing them under the pretense of legality. It was the equivalent of someone drawing a badge in crayon and calling themselves sheriff. "Marcy," I said slowly, "do you know if they ever registered a change in the enforcement process? Like the right to impose immediate fines without notice?" She gave me a long look, then shook her head. "If they did, I'd have stamped it myself. And I haven't seen a single thing from them since last spring. Not even the annual transparency filing, which is mandatory." That was it. That was the crack in the armor. I thanked her profusely, tucked the papers into my folder, and stepped back into the sun with something better than hope. I had proof. That evening, I gathered with a few trusted neighbors in my garage. Greg, Mr. Pendleton, from 2 doors down, and Alicia, a single mom who'd received 2 fines for leaving her recycling bin out an hour too long. I laid everything on the workbench like evidence in a courtroom drama. The violation letters, the sanitation laws, the county clerk records. They made it all up, I said. Every single rule, every fine, every threat, none of it is legal. Greg let out a low whistle. I knew it smelled fishy, but this... Alicia leaned in. "So what do we do?" "Go to the city." "More than that," I said. "We go public." I pulled out a draft, a formal complaint to the state HOA regulatory board. Attached was a request for a full audit, an ethics review, and suspension of board authority pending investigation. I had also written a letter to the local paper detailing the violations, the forged rules, and the intimidation tactics without naming names yet. "This isn't just about me anymore," I told them. "This is about what happens when a neighborhood forgets who it belongs to." 2 days later, the article hit the front page of the Creston Daily Chronicle. 37 violations for 1 trash can, Oak Hill HOA under fire for unlawful fines. It featured quotes from multiple neighbors, legal excerpts from city codes, and a summary of my county clerk findings. I didn't use Karen's name, but she outed herself by calling a press conference within 24 hours. The footage was gold. Standing in front of the clubhouse podium, flanked by 2 stiff-looking board members, she claimed the article was inflammatory, that certain residents were disrupting order, and that all violations were issued in accordance with long-standing HOA values. Not laws, not regulations, values. That clip made it onto the evening news. The floodgates opened. Emails from other residents poured in. Parents who'd been fined for sidewalk chalk. Elderly couples told their porch swings were hazards. A family fined because their daughter's wheelchair ramp violated front yard aesthetics. It was a pattern, and it was about to be exposed. By the end of the week, a local civil liberties attorney reached out to me. "I've been watching," she said, "and I think it's time we talk about a class action." The night after the attorney's call, I sat in my living room surrounded by folders, flash drives, and stacks of HOA documents. My coffee table looked like a crime scene, only instead of blood, there were highlighters, sticky notes, and printed screenshots. Greg had just left after helping me organize resident testimonials into categories: fabricated fines, verbal harassment, selective enforcement, and legal overreach. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was methodical. For weeks, I'd played defense, but now I was preparing for the offensive, because something had shifted in the neighborhood. People weren't whispering about Karen behind closed doors anymore. They were knocking on mine. There was the retired Marine who got fined for flying a slightly oversized flag. The young couple told to repaint their door to better fit community mood. And the elderly widow who got 3 separate violation notices because her wind chimes were audibly aggressive. And then there were the Venmo receipts. Yes, Venmo. It turned out many residents had been asked informally to send their compliance payments to what Karen claimed was the HOA's new streamlined finance method. But the username, it wasn't an official account. It was some version of her name at Karen Oak Hill Strong. The profile picture was literally her face in front of the clubhouse. I knew that would be gold in court, but I wanted more. So I went back to my security cameras, every angle, every day, since the first violation letter. There it was, 6:32 a.m. on a Tuesday, one of Karen's compliance enforcers walking right up my driveway, snapping a picture of the trash can, and then moving it 3 inches closer to the curb before taking another photo. Manipulated evidence. In another clip, a volunteer walked by my mailbox, then turned around to drop something inside. When I checked the timestamp, I realized that was the day I received a warning for a flagrant trash receptacle violation, which supposedly included a photo printed and sealed in the letter. Except the trash bin hadn't even been on the curb that day. Fabricated violation. The more I looked, the more I found. The HOA had been staging rule violations. For me, for Greg, for Alicia. Anyone who questioned Karen's rulebook became a target. This was more than petty abuse of power. This was institutionalized harassment. So I started building something else, a digital dossier. I called it Operation Sanity, and in it I included time-stamped video footage from my security system, photos of alleged violations, cross-referenced with county ordinances, screenshots of payment requests to Karen's Venmo emails from neighbors, recounting threats or surprise fines, HOA bylaws with edits showing unauthorized amendments. And my personal favorite, a calendar of dates where I received violations, 26 of which corresponded with days I hadn't even been home. Once it was all compiled, I made 2 versions, one for the lawyer and one for the press. But I wasn't quite done. Saturday morning, I got out my old workbench tools and headed to the garage. Greg joined me around noon, raising an eyebrow when he saw the lumber and paint. "You building a deck or a case?" he joked. Both I said, hammering in the first nail. By evening, we had erected something that looked half like a lemonade stand and half like a toll booth painted barn red with hand-lettered white trim. Across the front, in bold capital letters, I painted, "Truth Station HOA Violation Walkthrough Free for Neighbors." I parked it on my front lawn, right next to the sidewalk. And then I did something bold. I hand-delivered flyers to every house on my street. Tired of fake fines? Want to know what's legal and what's not? Bring your violation letters, your questions, or just your curiosity. I'll be outside every day from 4-7 p.m. this week. Let's make sense of the nonsense, together. It started with just Alicia. Then came Greg. Then the Thompsons, the Corderos. Even Ms. Linda from the cul-de-sac, who had avoided conflict since the Bush administration, showed up with a folder of printouts. Within 3 days, my front yard became the unofficial truth hub of Oak Hill. We shared stories. We compared letters, and we began to realize just how deep the manipulation had gone. By Friday, a local news van pulled up. "Are you the guy who got 37 violations for a trash can?" the reporter asked. "Yep," I said. But it turns out I'm not the only one. That night, the news segment ran across the region. They called it the Trash Can Rebellion and showed footage of my booth quotes from neighbors and a brief statement from the HOA's lawyer. The Oak Hill HOA is reviewing internal policies and encourages residents to submit concerns through proper channels. Translation, they were panicking. And then right on cue came the knock at my door. It was 9:15 p.m. I opened it to find a well-dressed man in a navy blue suit and polished leather shoes. In his hand, a leather briefcase. Mr. Graham.
Yes.
I'm Robert Lanning, legal counsel for the Oak Hill Community Preservation Association. Do you have a moment? I crossed my arms. Only if it's not about a trash can. His lips tightened. May I come in? I didn't invite him in. I stepped outside instead, closing the door behind me. He cleared his throat and opened his briefcase, pulling out a folder. The board would like to settle this matter, quietly. There's been a breakdown in communication. I looked at the folder, then back at him. You're apologizing. He hesitated. I'm acknowledging that certain enforcement actions may not have adhered strictly to procedural guidelines. That's a lawyer speak for admitting you were wrong. He gave a faint smile. We'd prefer to move forward constructively. I let that hang in the air. I'll think about it, I said. But in the meantime, tell Karen her clipboard's not a badge, and tell your board the truth doesn't need HOA approval. I turned and walked back inside, leaving him standing there under the porch light and the eyes of half the neighborhood. The following morning, I woke up to a surprise. I never expected my driveway was filled with lawn chairs. No joke. Plastic ones, folding ones. Even one rocking chair that had clearly been stolen from someone's porch. It was as if the entire neighborhood had decided that my truth station needed an audience section. By the time I walked out with my morning coffee, there were already 5 people seated chatting like it was a front row seat to a soap opera. Greg handed me a fresh stack of violation letters people had left in my mailbox overnight. One envelope was marked, "From the guy with the purple shutters, tell me if they're really illegal." It was surreal, but also empowering. The Trash Can Rebellion, as the local news had dubbed it, had sparked something. For the first time in years, the residents of Oak Hill were talking, and not about lawn lengths or mailbox paint. They were talking about rights bylaws, and the difference between HOA power and pure bullying. Karen didn't like that. At 10:03 a.m., she stormed down the sidewalk in a cobalt blue blazer and heels that clicked like a metronome of doom. Her usual clipboard was clutched in both hands, a tight smile on her face, as she approached the crowd. "Mr. Graham," she said through gritted teeth, "you are holding unauthorized assemblies on HOA property." "Sidewalk's public," I replied, sipping my coffee. "Front lawn's mine. You want to find me again?" She raised her clipboard. "I've issued a cease and desist notice. You are inciting disorder, and I've had multiple complaints." From who asked Mrs. Chan from across the street, because it sure wasn't me. "Or me," added Mr. Dietrich, holding up a half-eaten banana muffin. "This is the most peaceful it's been around here in months." Karen flushed. Her eyes darted around. "You're disrupting the community." "No," I said. "You're disrupting it. I'm just helping people understand what's legal and what's nonsense." That's when Alicia stood up. She didn't say a word. She simply walked over to Karen, looked her dead in the eyes, and handed her a bright yellow envelope. "What is this?" Karen snapped. "A copy of the complaint," Alicia said. "Filed with the county, the state HOA commission, and our attorney. Oh, and Channel 7 wants to interview you later this week." You could have heard a pine needle drop. Karen's jaw opened and closed twice before she spun on her heels and walked away at full speed, clipboard flapping, blazer bouncing, dignity unraveling with every step. Over the next 3 days, the neighborhood turned into a quiet revolution. Neighbors brought over pastries, folding tables, and even laminated guides on residents' rights that Greg printed out. People donated security footage, email chains, and phone recordings. I wasn't leading anymore. I was just the spark. The people were the fire. And then came the bombshell. Channel 7 aired a follow-up segment. This time, they included not just our booth and Karen's aggressive tactics, but an interview with a former HOA treasurer who anonymously confirmed that many fines were not logged in official records. Donations were routinely funneled to a discretionary fund managed solely by Karen. Several budget votes had occurred without quorum, and HOA funds had been used to pay for Karen's personal landscaping. The HOA issued a vague press release the next day about restructuring, but it was too late. The County Board of Oversight officially opened an investigation, and the State HOA Commission launched a compliance audit. That evening, just as the sun dipped behind the oak trees, someone knocked on my door again. This time, it wasn't a lawyer. It was Sam, a soft-spoken man from 2 blocks over who usually kept to himself. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said. "My wife's been scared to speak up for years. You changed that." I nodded, humbled. "We all changed it." He handed me a small envelope. Inside was a photo of a trash can sitting squarely beside a pristine flower bed. "One of Karen's first targets," he said with a grin. "Keep it for the museum." And just like that, I realized something. This had never been about me versus the HOA. It was about fear versus courage, silence versus truth, and now, truth was winning. The truth station became a community board. The lawn chairs stayed now under a canopy. The HOA they called an emergency election. Karen, well, we hadn't seen her in days. But her clipboard. Someone hung it on a wooden stake next to the truth booth with a hand-painted sign, in memory of the old order. We didn't burn it, we just retired it, with a smirk and a whole lot of justice. By the start of the following week, our once sleepy HOA boardroom, usually reserved for dry budget meetings and passive-aggressive landscaping debates, had become the subject of a full-blown legal firestorm. First came the letters. Certified mail, couriered envelopes, digital PDFs. Every board member was served notice of investigation. The county had opened a formal complaint review, and the state HOA Oversight Commission had begun a compliance audit. Someone even forwarded me a screenshot from a regional legal newsletter, Local HOA Under Fire for Abuse of Power and Unauthorized Violations. Karen's name was right there in bold print. For someone who once bragged about keeping the neighborhood out of the news, she was now the news. And the irony. It was all sparked by one trash can. The HOA called an emergency meeting, but instead of holding it in their usual back room of the clubhouse, they had to move it to the local community center gym because over 150 residents RSVP'd. I arrived early and took a seat in the back. Karen wasn't at the podium. Instead, a red-faced vice president named Colin tried to keep order while fumbling through legal disclaimers. His voice trembled as he read prepared remarks. "We, acknowledge recent concerns and are cooperating fully with state and county investigators." The crowd wasn't having it. Hands shot up. Voices demanded answers. Mrs. Chan stood up. "Why were my fines doubled without any hearing?" Mr. Dietrich added, "Where did the $18,000 for beautification lighting go?" "Because our street hasn't had a working lamppost in 2 years." Alicia, bless her boldness, didn't raise a hand. She just walked straight up to the mic. "Here's the deal," she said. "We want the books opened. We want Karen's resignation. We want to dissolve this board and hold new elections under third-party supervision. And we want this in writing, tonight." The place erupted in cheers. I watched from the back as Colin wiped sweat from his brow and whispered furiously with the remaining board members. They looked like cornered chess pieces, boxed in by the very people they once ruled with silent intimidation. And then, as if scripted by karma itself, a courier walked into the gym holding a stack of envelopes. "Delivery for Karen Delaney and the Oak Hill HOA board," he said loudly. It was the official notice of subpoena from the State HOA Oversight Commission. The next morning, I found my email inbox flooded with messages from other HOAs. Apparently, our story had gone viral. Posts about the trash can rebellion were trending on neighborhood forums, Facebook community groups, and even Reddit. I found memes of Karen's infamous clipboard dubbed the weapon of mass citation. Someone had photoshopped it into movie posters, Clipboard of Doom, starring Karen Delaney. But it wasn't just jokes. People were sharing their own stories. An elderly couple in Arizona had been fined $500 for wind chimes. A single mother in Florida faced foreclosure threats over a garden gnome. And in every message, one thing was clear. This wasn't just our fight. It was a movement. Greg and I worked late that night compiling documentation. With Alicia's help, we sent a detailed report to a civil rights law group specializing in HOA abuse. They called back in 12 hours. "We've been waiting for a case like this," the attorney said. "If you're willing, we'd like to represent you and anyone else who's been wrongfully fined under unconstitutional HOA practices." My hands shook as I nodded, even though they couldn't see it. "We're ready." They filed a class action suit by the end of the week. Meanwhile, Karen. She tried one last move. She sent out a formal letter to all residents claiming that I had intentionally destabilized the HOA and that my illegal gatherings had caused reputational harm to the neighborhood. She even threatened defamation suits. It backfired spectacularly because Greg uploaded that letter along with every recorded HOA fine audio clip, and Karen's own public threats to a Google Drive. Then he shared it with the entire community. The backlash was instant. Dozens of homeowners revoked their auto payments. Others began spray painting over the HOA signs. A few even took down the compliance cameras Karen had installed without permits. The power was gone. A week later, Karen resigned. No speech, no statement, just a one-line email. Effective immediately, I am stepping down from all HOA duties. We found out later she had retained a personal attorney because the audit had uncovered misuse of HOA funds totaling over $42,000, including payments to a fictitious consulting company registered under her sister's name. I stood on my porch that night looking out over the neighborhood. It felt different now. People waved. Kids rode bikes past my house without parents hissing, "Don't go near his lawn." Someone even dropped off a cake shaped like a trash can. I laughed harder than I had in months. The truth station was still there, though. Now it had become more of a community hangout than a protest site. And next to it, a small wooden sign Greg had hammered into the grass. "Freedom from fines begins here." I knew the battle wasn't over. The lawsuit would take time. The HOA would need to be rebuilt from scratch. But for the first time, it felt like the neighborhood belonged to the people again. Not to rules, not to fear, not to Karen. A week passed. A calm, almost eerie quiet settled over the neighborhood. No warning letters, no fake citations slipped into mailboxes. The clipboard brigade had vanished. The HOA office, once buzzing with rigid enforcers, sat dark and empty. The community breathed for the first time in years freely. Then it came. A letter. Not the kind with fines or threats. It was embossed, thick envelope, postmarked downtown. From the office of the HOA's legal counsel, Richard Feynman-esque. I opened it slowly, not sure what to expect. What I found inside wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a threat. It was an apology. "Dear Mr. Daniels, on behalf of the Oak Hill Homeowners Association Legal Advisory Committee, we extend a formal and sincere apology regarding the recent and past enforcement actions taken against you, specifically those amounting to 37 separate citations related to waste receptacle placement. Upon further internal review, these violations have been deemed excessive, improper, and inconsistent with the bylaws as written. The HOA board, under previous leadership, exercised authority in a manner that failed to meet both legal standards and principles of fairness. Please know that all citations issued to your property have been rescinded in full. Any record of infraction has been removed from HOA files, and your standing as a homeowner is affirmed as in good condition, with a full waiver of any pending fees or balances. Furthermore, our firm is cooperating with state oversight agencies to provide full transparency and accountability for past actions of the HOA board. We regret any stress or hardship caused and hope to rebuild trust with all members of the Oak Hill community. Sincerely, Richard Feynman, Legal Counsel, Oak Hill HOA. I read it twice, then again. It was surreal. This wasn't just a legal formality, it was surrender. I forwarded it to Alicia and Greg. Within minutes, Greg uploaded a scanned copy to the community site. Under the header, they finally admitted it. It went viral faster than we could refresh the page. Neighbors knocked on my door that evening, one after another. They brought pies, 6-packs lawn chairs. It wasn't a party, it was a porch gathering of survivors, people who had lived under quiet tyranny for too long. "You made them blink," Mr. Cho said. "No," I replied, "we all did." The legal process rolled forward. The class action suit moved to pretrial motions. Depositions began. Karen was subpoenaed, as were 2 former board members and their accountant. Turns out those party vendors from the HOA's infamous Spring Gala didn't even exist. They were aliases linked to Karen's Cousins LLC. The State Oversight Commission issued new guidelines for HOA operations, statewide policies modeled after our case. We were becoming a case study in how not to run an HOA, but also in how a neighborhood could fight back. Then came the proposal to reform the HOA, not as a ruling board, but as a stewardship council. It would be purely volunteer-based, focused only on shared community maintenance, with no power to fine, cite, or penalize. No dues could be raised without a 70% community vote. I was asked to lead it. I declined. I'm not looking to run anything I said at the town hall. Just to live somewhere where common sense and decency win. Let that be enough. I agreed to serve as an ethics advisor alongside Alicia and Mrs. Denton. Greg, he became the unofficial record keeper, our archivist of absurdity, forever documenting the trash can wars. So we never forgot how ridiculous it had gotten. One final twist came weeks later. A small manila envelope appeared on my porch. No return address. Inside was Karen's original HOA badge, plastic laminated printed from an inkjet snapped clean in half. Taped to it was a note in shaky cursive. "You were right. I lost myself in control. I hope the neighborhood forgives me someday."
Okay.
I sat down on the steps staring at it. Forgiveness. Not demanded. Just hoped for. It was more than I expected. And strangely, exactly what I needed. That Sunday, I placed my trash can at the curb, middle of the driveway, lid wide open. No shame. And just like that, the neighborhood smiled back. The sun rose over Oak Hill with a kind of clarity we hadn't known in years. There was no official HOA patrol driving slowly through the neighborhood. No whispering about infractions. No sudden quiet tension whenever someone stepped outside with garden shears or put up a seasonal wreath. Just neighbors, lawns, laughter. The trash can sat proudly by my driveway, unbothered and untouched. And somehow, that silly plastic bin had become a symbol. It wasn't just about the 37 violations anymore. It wasn't about a power-hungry HOA or a clipboard-wielding Karen. It was about the slow erosion of common sense and the quiet reclaiming of it. The trash can had started as the spark of petty overreach, and it had lit a fire that burned through layers of silence, fear, and injustice. Alicia and Greg came by that afternoon with a surprise. "We made something," Greg said with a mischievous grin. They wheeled out a replica, a life-sized wooden sculpture of the infamous trash can, painted in ridiculous detail, including a small sign that read, "Compliance level legendary." "It's for the new park center," Alicia said, "where the HOA headquarters used to be." "You're kidding." "Nope," the board voted. Even the temporary council thought it was poetic. I stood there trying not to laugh and failing. "Guess I'm a monument now." Greg smirked. "Nah, the can is." They left it on my lawn for a few hours while we grilled some hot dogs. A few neighbors drove by, slowed down, and honked or waved. It wasn't mocking, it was camaraderie. Shared experience, recognition. That evening, I walked over to the community lot, the space once reserved for authorized HOA use only. Now it had a few benches, a couple of raised garden beds, and a bulletin board filled with flyers for potlucks, tutoring groups, and volunteer days. In the center was the trash can sculpture, anchored into a concrete base. Someone had already left flowers next to it, a bouquet of yellow daisies, and taped to the side, another note, "To the neighbor who reminded us that fairness matters more than fear. Thank you." I stood in the twilight letting that land. Not all victories are loud. Sometimes they roll out to the curb on Tuesday morning and return empty but proud. Weeks later, a reporter from a regional magazine came to town. She'd heard about the story, the viral posts, the letter from the HOA lawyer, the collapse of the board, and the now iconic trash can statue. She interviewed me at the community center, asked the usual questions, what it was like, how it felt, what advice I had for other neighborhoods caught in HOA drama. I thought about it for a moment. "Start small," I said. "Not with lawyers or protests, just with questions. Why, who decided, what gives them that power? And then don't let the absurd go unchallenged, even if it's just about where you put your garbage." She smiled. "Do you regret any of it?" I looked out the window, saw two kids racing bikes past the old HOA office, now being converted into a free library and community pantry. "No," I said. "I regret not doing something sooner." She closed her notebook. "Mind if I title the piece, 'The Man Who Beat the Trash Can, Tyrants'?" I laughed. "You do whatever helps people read it." That night, I got one last knock at the door. It was Karen. Hair shorter, makeup minimal, no clipboard. Just her, holding a paper bag. "I made banana bread," she said awkwardly. "Old family recipe." I paused, unsure. "It's not poisoned," she added with a nervous laugh. I opened the door. She handed it to me. "I've been attending meetings downtown, learning about mediation and restorative justice. I'm trying." I nodded. "That's something." She looked around. "You really cleaned this place up." "No HOA needed," I said. She smiled sadly. "I'll never live that down, will I?" "Maybe not," I said. "But if you keep showing up like this, maybe you'll write a different chapter." She nodded once and turned to go. I closed the door behind her and looked at the bag in my hands. Banana bread. From Karen. If that wasn't progress, I didn't know what was. And so life in Oak Hill moved on. Calmer, kinder, more aware. We still had rules, but now we had voices too. And every Tuesday morning when I wheeled that infamous trash can to the edge of my driveway, I did it with a quiet smile. Because in a world where common sense often takes a back seat to control, sometimes the trash takes itself out and leaves room for something better.